Hey everyone, so today we are taking a close look at a really fascinating and honestly controversial figure in psychology, Rollo May. Now, if you've ever read his work, you know his ideas on things like anxiety and freedom, they just hit you on a deep level. But the big question is, how do these really profound ideas actually stack up when you put them under a scientific microscope? Well, let's find out.
So here's the game plan. We're going to start with what I like to call the Rollo-May paradox. Then we'll lay out the ground rules, the 6 things that make any scientific theory actually useful. From there, we'll grade May's work on each of those points one by one, from its ability to spark research to its basic logic. And at the end, we'll deliver the final verdict. Think of it like we're giving his life's work a report card. Okay, so what exactly is this paradox? Well, it's this huge conflict at the very heart of Rollo May's legacy. You see, on one hand, he's a giant. His writing connects with people in a way that very few thinkers ever do. But on the other hand, mainstream scientific psychology has pretty much dismissed him, calling his work untestable, maybe even anti-science. And this really shows you the two sides of the coin. On the left, you've got why he's so beloved. He just gets the human experience. But on the right, you have this really sharp critique from the scientific community. May himself argued that traditional science was just too sterile, that it couldn't possibly capture what it really means to be human. So what was he? A brilliant philosopher? Or just a bad scientist? To figure that out, we can't just go with a gut feeling. We need a system, right? A set of ground rules. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to evaluate May's entire existential psychology against the 6 standard criteria that scientists use to figure out if a theory is any good. And here's our rubric. A useful theory needs to do a few key things. It has to spark new research. It has to be testable, meaning you have to be able to prove it wrong. It should organize what we already know, give us a practical guide for action, be logically consistent, and, be as simple as possible. So let's see how May does, one criterion at a time. First up, we're looking at the real heavy hitters of science. Does the theory actually lead to new discoveries? And maybe more importantly, can you even test it at all? So the first question is pretty straightforward. Does Rollo May's work give other scientists something to build on? Does it create a launch pad for new questions, new hypotheses, new studies? And the answer, to put it bluntly, is a big no. When it comes to generating research, the score is very, very low. So why such a bad grade right out of the gate? Well, for one, May never really presented his ideas like a formal theory. His writing feels much more like philosophy than a scientific blueprint. And yeah, there's some related research out there, like terror management theory, which is all about our fear of death. But that stuff doesn't come directly from May's specific ideas. It's more of a distant cousin. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is super closely related, verifiability. Or as scientists often call it, falsifiability. This is absolutely critical. For an idea to be scientific, there has to be some way, at least in principle, to prove it's wrong. If you can't test it, it's not really science. It's more like a belief system. And on this one, well, you guessed it. The verdict is exactly the same. Very low. The main issue here is that the theory is it's too squishy. It's too vague. Big ideas like destiny or will or even existential anxiety aren't defined precisely enough to be measured in an experiment. And if you can't measure it, you can't confirm it or deny it. It's basically untestable. Okay, so May's work is not looking so hot on the whole testability front. But what about its other jobs? How well does it organize everything we already know about being human? And is it actually useful in the real world? Let's see if he can pull his grade up here. And here we go, our first little twist. When we're talking about organizing knowledge, May's work gets a solid average. So it's not a total bust, but it's not exactly an A+ either. And you can see why it's a mixed bag. On one hand, May's great strength was that he wasn't afraid to dive into the messy, complicated, deep stuff that other, more rigid theories just completely ignored. But in doing that, he also kind of skipped over huge important areas of psychology. Things like development, learning, motivation, how we think. There's this great quote from the psychologist Gordon Allport that fits perfectly here. Do not forget what you have decided to neglect. And that's the thing. May's omissions, they weren't accidents. They were choices. He intentionally focused on the existential parts of life, and that decision pretty much defined the limits of his work. Okay, but what about practicality? Can May's theory actually help a therapist or counselor guide their clients? On this one, the verdict is pretty harsh. Very weak. Because his ideas are pulled more from philosophy than from research, they just don't translate into clear, concrete, actionable advice.
Let's move on to our final 2 grades. These are all about the internal structure of the theory itself. Is it logically sound? And is it clean and simple? Or is it overly complicated? So when it comes to internal consistency, making sure all the pieces of the theory fit together without contradictions, May's work, well, it falls short. It struggles to hold together as a single coherent system. And the biggest problem, again, is the language. May had a habit of using slightly different definitions for his most important concepts, like anxiety or guilt or will, depending on which book you're reading. He never gave them what scientists call operational definitions, which is just a fancy way of saying a single, clear definition of what something is and how you measure it. Without that, the concepts just become really slippery. And for our last criterion, parsimony, which is just the idea that simpler explanations are better, May actually gets a moderate rating. Look, his writing could be pretty dense sometimes, but to be fair, he was tackling some incredibly complex parts of human nature. He wasn't trying to boil down the entire human personality into some simple formula. So we've graded his work against all 6 of these scientific standards. What's the final verdict? Well, I think the best way to describe him, a way that May himself would probably agree with, is as a philosopher-therapist. And this report card really tells the whole story, doesn't it? You can see the patterns so clearly. Rock-bottom scores on the really core scientific stuff, like generating research and being testable, kind of weak to average scores on being practical and organizing information, and then mixed results on its internal logic. This is the profile of a brilliant philosophy, not a scientific theory. Which really brings us to the most important question of all. Rollo May's work might be a failure as a scientific theory, but it's a massive success at connecting with our search for meaning. So maybe the takeaway here isn't just a grade. Maybe it's a challenge. Does a way of understanding ourselves have to be scientific to actually be valuable? Now that is something to think about.